The New York Football Giants, finally. We didn't know if it would ever come, but it did. They lose their first game of the season. It comes at home against division rival, the Dallas Cowboys. We break down the game on both sides of the ball, the performance of Daniel Jones, and what seems to be a theme for this team, more injuries. All coming up next. Yes, friends. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast. So, of course, we are your hosts over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets, covering Media Day, wouldn't you know it, over on the Locked On Nets podcast with my boy Doug Norrie. And yonder there is the healthy, wealthy, and wise, though I think should be flying that banner at half-mast following the loss, Mr. Andrew Makowitz.
Oh, it's tough when you're the only game in town, Adam. It's tough when it's
All eyes
against
on,
your
baby.
everyone's watching. It's tough when it's a bitter division rival, and it's even worse waking up Tuesday morning and any sports. This is one of those days where if you're a Giants fan, just don't turn on any sports television until at least 1:00 in the afternoon, because it's going to be all about how the Cowboys are doing great and nothing good for any Giant fan right now.
So we welcome everybody in over on YouTube. Marty was not – listen, ever since he came in late that one time, he is refusing to come late to the party going forward. Everybody else, as you get in the door, we're going to talk about, obviously, the game on all sides of the ball, all three phases, actually, because there's a reason to take a look at special teams once again and not in a positive light. And to your point, I said it – I don't know if I said it over on the social media or not, but everyone on ESPN in the pregame picked the Giants to win. And I was like, well, that's it. Might as well pack it up.
Kiss of death.
It's like, and I will say, we spend so much time trying to be, balanced about how we look at this season, even after the first 2 weeks and the first two wins. But from a high level media coverage, once you win two games, that's it. Like it's all systems go. This team is, they're going to be a playoff team. This team's turned it around. Brian Daboll has already fixed it and righted the ship. And then you get into this game. And if you're a fan that follows the team consistently, if you're like Andy and myself, who covers the team and watches the team every single day, you know that there were a lot of things potentially that could rear their ugly head. Before we get into that, though, we are just going to say, unfortunately, final play of the game, away from the action, Sterling Shepard running a route, goes down, non-contact, no one around him. And I don't know, when you were watching the game in real time, Andy, it went from, and we'll talk about this more, but David Sills slips on the play, turnover, the game is over. And then all of a sudden, like, the cameras just are on Sterling Shepard sitting on a cart with every Giant and Cowboy player coming around him, giving him high fives, giving him a pat on the back. And it was like, I'm sorry, what just happened? And then they showed the replay, man, and it looks like, as Brian Daboll said after the game, it does not look good. Non-contact is never a good sign. Looks like the knee. They're, in this moment, saying most likely season ending, and in that regard, also potentially career ending from a New York Football Giants standpoint for Sterling Shepard.
Yeah, it was there was a whole host of things that happened on one of those last plays before the kneel downs at the end of the game. Obviously you kind of have you have David Sills who slips. Trayvon Diggs has an interception. I immediately thought that the ball had hit the ground and that, like, everyone was kind of just standing around being like, did he really catch that? Are we sure? And while I'm still thinking, like, do the Giants have a chance? They pan over to Sterling Shepard writhing in pain on the ground. You're like, Can this get any worse? Like, what is happening right now? Yeah. And yeah, it was really tough to see the non-contact. It looked almost like, like there was a sniper at the top of MetLife Stadium and he kind of shot Sterling Shepard in the knee, because the non-contact, the way that he went down, you could tell that it was a very serious knee injury. Sources are already saying this morning that it's not looking good. It looks like it will be a serious knee injury, likely season ending, another leg debilitating injury for Sterling Shepard. We love him. He's the heart and soul of the Giants when he's out there. The problem has always been, Adam, that he's just not available for the team. And this is another one of those just freak accidents. But like you said, he restructured his contract to come back. He's going to be a free agent at the end of the year. He's going to be 30 years old. While we'd love to see him back in some kind of veteran capacity, it would be really unfortunate to see his last snap as a Giant be a non-contact random injury in a loss to Dallas.
And in a lot of ways, I mean, it does, to your point, like, it feels encapsulating for what his career has been, right? Shows We know the ability, and then the injuries, they just keep coming up. So we'll get back into the wide receiver room inside of this game as well coming up here, because there's more than just injuries to discuss, including that final play with David Sills. However, it felt like starting on the defensive side of the ball was the right move here, because so far to this point, the defense has been a bright spot. We've been really excited about what Wink Martindale has been able to do. He's been adaptive. He's been versatile. He's used a host of different players to accomplish the goal of being an effective defense. In this game, you get back Kayvon Thibodeax. You get back Azeez Ojulari. I think that the absence of Leonard Williams was very much felt, but it's the first time that coming out of the game, I looked at the defensive side of the ball. I know it's 23 points, and it's a relatively late score to get to that for Dallas, and yet this is the first time where I thought, oh, this defense didn't look as dynamic as we've seen it in the first 2 weeks. And Wink Martindale didn't look like he had the next thing to go to. He had the wrinkle to throw out there. They didn't seem to be very effective. The pressure did not get to Cooper Rush hardly at all. And they got burned again in the running game. And oddly enough, as we talked about in the pregame, we said, watch out for Tony Pollard as that receiving back. Watch out for Tony Pollard with the ball in his hands as a running back, because he went for 100+ second week that this defense has had that happen to them.
Yeah, I mean, look, Adam, the biggest difference, for the defense for the Giants was also we're not getting pressure on the quarterback. You mentioned Cooper Rush kind of had all the time in the world to throw. It felt like he was kind of sitting back there and had the pick of his litter. Kayvon Thibodeax, Azeez Ojulari, no Leonard Williams getting pressure up the middle. It felt like that Dallas was dictating what they wanted to do on offense to the Giants defense, when Wink Martindale has come out and said before many times, like, we're not just going to sit back and let the offense do whatever they want against us. That's how it felt in this game. It felt like because we weren't getting any pressure, because they were effectively moving the ball on the ground, we kind of felt a little defenseless. And while it's only 23 points, based on how the Dallas defense was playing and everything else on the other side of the ball, it felt like the first team to 20 was going to win this game. And unfortunately, that was Dallas.
Yeah, both teams really struggled to put points on the board for the majority of this game. Then it started to kind of ramp up there on the back end in the second half. To your point, the time of possession in this one was 33, basically 27 in favor of the Dallas Cowboys. It's fairly even keeled there. But when you go inside the numbers of this game and you see that, we know, and we'll talk about on the other side, how much pressure was coming at Daniel Jones in this Giants offense, you just flat out could not find the rhythm defensively. Are you comfortable saying Azeez Ojulari and Kayvon Thibodeax both coming back from injury? We know they build up during practice during the week, but game reps matter, right? Just from the endurance standpoint. Like, are you comfortable chalking it up to, hey, that's the way it's going to look when you're first getting back out on the field? Or are you a little bit frustrated that those two players specifically, like, those are plus matchups for them, right? They had a 40-year-old shifting over to left guard at one point for the Dallas Cowboys. Like, you needed to be able to go out there and start to have some impact. And I said it in the pregame. I wasn't going to put it all on Kayvon Thibodeax and come out of this one saying terrible performance if he didn't get after the quarterback. And yet his name wasn't getting called at all, right? Neither was Azeez Ojulari. So, I mean, you have to at least tip your cap to Dallas from that standpoint of saying they did an effective job. They kept in Tony Pollard, who stepped up and made some good blocks in the passing game, as did Zeke Elliott, right? Like, it was just an effective job by the offense for Dallas. And I was just surprised that there wasn't something else getting thrown in there. Wink Martindale tried to dial up the blitzes here and there, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter where they came from. It was a relatively ineffective package.
The hardest part is when your safeties and your deep secondary leads the team in tackles, Adam. What that means is that players are getting to the second level, wide receivers are open, and the secondary is making the tackles 7 to 10 yards down the field.
Yeah.
Julian Love had 14 total tackles, right? Like, that is way too many for Julian Love to have. And then
once you get to a certain number, it becomes he's in cleanup duty, right? This isn't the effective, oh my God, I blew up a play. This is I'm ending it before it becomes a disaster.
The top three tacklers were Julian Love, Adoree Jackson, and Xavier McKinney. All three secondary players. You can't have that happening. You need someone on the defensive line to be stopping the run effectively. Jihad Ward was next with 6 tackles, but yeah, to me, listen, Azeez Ojulari had 8 sacks last season. He showed that he can get to the quarterback when he is healthy. He had 1 tackle. Kayvon Thibodeax had 1 tackle and 1 pass deflection. It just felt like we needed to get that pressure on Cooper Rush to force him to get the ball out earlier, and we just couldn't do it. And that was the big deciding factor for me. Was the Cowboys had their pick of being able to throw the ball when they wanted, run the ball effectively with Tony Pollard. They kind of had both the pass and the run going, which made it harder for the Giants to just make them very one-dimensional.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest part of it. When you don't force the hand a little bit for the opposing offense, all of a sudden they can play balanced. And I think that's the concern, or just that's what happened in this game in particular, right? Even in the first 3 weeks, you go back weeks 1 and week 2. Remember, the Giants were down 13-0 at one point against the Tennessee Titans, but it's not the type of offense or the type of team or just the type of game where it was going to be a problem to stick to the game script, right? To keep your balanced approach to it and wait for your opportunities to come. Instead, in this one, it really felt like, boy, if you don't switch up what the tempo is here for the Dallas Cowboys offense, we're going to be destined to find ourselves having a problem. And ultimately, just as we wrap around our head on the numbers here, only 215 passing yards, 176 rushing yards. We said Tony Pollard going for 100 plus, but that's the kind of balance I think that teams can look to bring against the Giants of be opportunistic when it comes to the passing game. If you can punish them in the run, then you're going to be successful. Last thing on the defensive side here, I will say a lot of people, I think, were starting to come out about Dexter Lawrence and saying, well, Leonard Williams isn't there. You need someone to step up. Dexter Lawrence is the man in the middle. Like, let's just be clear. The Giants gave up 100 plus rushing yards the week prior as well. It's not one individual player. That being said, I think the pressure for Kayvon Thibodeax and the pressure for Azeez Ojulari, that's what you lose when you don't have Leonard Williams. Because as we've talked about before, his versatility makes him effective inside, outside, moving from sideline to sideline at times, right? He is so effective in the ways he can be utilized. You can't replace him with one player. That's the issue. Wink has to go to multiple guys, multiple looks, and you're going to fall down somewhere.
And last thing on the defensive side, it really felt like the turning point in the game is after Saquon Barkley has that electric 36-yard run, which we're going to talk about the offense in a minute. The Giants are up in the second half, in the third quarter by a touchdown. And you feel there's 5 minutes to go in the third quarter. You're like, here it is, guys. Here is our opportunity to get that one stop so that the Giants aren't always playing catch up and playing from behind. If the Giants can get a stop there and they get the ball back with the lead, it feels like then Daniel Jones doesn't have to force things. It feels like the offense may be able to get in a rhythm. Unfortunately, Cowboys go 9 plays, 75 yards, shred the defense and make it 13-13. You're like, if we could just have had that lead for a little bit longer, get the ball back to the offense, maybe we could get some continuity going on. That to me was the big turning point in the game.
Yeah, really big moment there that you bring up when you felt like, hey, the Giants defense gets to, I think I said this out loud, gets to play with a lead. And I went, well, and then it was gone, right? And this is, again, the pullback perspective is when you look across this roster and we know when you lose Aaron Robinson, whatever he was going to be, okay, now you're down your starting corner that you were going to have across from Adoree Jackson. We know that the linebacking crew had injuries in the preseason, doesn't really have this point to they're going to lead us and be the anchor in the middle there. Combine that with losing Leonard Williams, right? Like all of these factors, we understand it's not going to be perfect all the time for the Giants. So we're not going to overstate it. They lost the game by 1 score, right? It was a hard-fought game, and I think if you scripted it out a little bit differently, you would feel like, it was a back-and-forth battle. Both teams really just kind of dragged themselves through the first couple 2+ quarters and then started to dial it up. When we turn it over to the offensive side of the ball, John Feliciano came right out after this game, and I don't think there's probably not much else to say here. I don't think we played particularly very well up front, and other places that are not my job, Senator John Feliciano said via the team's official transcript, and everyone knows we got to help 8, especially when he's out there doing what he's doing, just never giving up on the play, taking big hits, making plays with his legs. And I mean, he did everything he could out there, and this loss is on us up front, not on 8. Now, we'll get to Daniel Jones here in a little bit. You expect to hear these type of comments from anybody across the offensive line in a game. Now, and I'll go a step further, is you appreciate what John Feliciano is saying, and the line did not play particularly well, at any position, maybe outside of Andrew Thomas. Watch Glowinski get absolutely thrown on his back by Micah Parsons, which was disturbing after he had a chip from Evan Neal. But Evan Neal had his worst game of his young rookie career by far. You could not watch a snap without seeing someone burning him specifically on the outside, getting around him on the edge, using that speed. We're not going to drag him because Andrew Thomas went through these growing pains, but this is the lumps here, right? And this was a really brutal game to watch for Evan Neal.
It's hard to win that way, Neal said. The bulk of those sacks were on me. I take full responsibility for that. I've got to play better. I hate being on the end of this. And I think what you're kind of scratching on something that I think is really important is that the Giants lost this game, and in the locker room, instead of everyone making excuses for Daniel Jones, it felt like people were taking accountability, which feels like a different avenue than we're not normally accustomed to. Usually it's, oh, we got to protect our teammates, make sure that I take on the responsibility. This one was like, no, everyone across the line, even Brian Daboll said we got to do a better job protecting him. It felt like everyone kind of acknowledged that we can't win football games if the offensive line is going to play that way. You mentioned Evan Neal. It's still very, very early, 3 games into his career. Right now, though, he looks overwhelmed and overmatched with the pure speed of pass rushers in the NFL, and it's not going to get easier. Like, this is going to happen every week. So we either need to scheme our way away from him being in one-on-one against big pass rushers, or we have to run the ball towards his side so he can get some confidence in the run game. But we clearly cannot just have him one-on-one with defensive ends out on an island because it's just not working right now.
Let's talk about that aspect of it, because we talked about the defense and we've been excited about what Wink Martindale has brought to it, but thought in this game, if there was something to go to, he couldn't find it. And maybe there just flat out wasn't, right? Limited number of guys that you can go to. But that being said, offensively, do you feel like you can't listen? The issue is the issue, right? You can't hide your monstrous right tackle and the concerns that he's having. And yet they did leave him out there. On the island, quite frankly, where, like, in my mind, I know if you put in the tight end, you lose a receiver in the passing game. I know if you keep Saquon into block, it affects what you want to do. But there does come a point in the game where you have to say, listen, like, especially after you get that touchdown, I know the defense gets to the score, but at some point it needs to be, hey, let's try to batten this thing down. Let's try to play smart football here. Let's try to scheme our way to some little chunk plays when we can. And let's just, effectively, as again, we're holding Daniel Jones to the end here, but even if it is, Daniel Jones needs to take those balls on snaps and do a designed gut run play, right? He needs to get out on the edge. There were a handful of plays that were designed for Jones and the offense to go towards the issue, specifically in the passing game of Evan Neal, and that just seemed counterintuitive to me. Do you take any issue with the way Mike Kafka was approaching the offensive play calling? Understanding you're down a lot of receivers. We're going to talk wide receivers here in a second. I know the weapon arsenal was limited here, but that doesn't change the play calling, though. That shouldn't impact the way you think about scheming away from a problem.
Well, yeah, but the issue is, Adam, there's a whole host of ways that you can scheme against a guy getting beat. One of the ways that they were trying to do it was to be able to make the play roll towards Evan Neal or plays to Evan Neal's side so that Daniel Jones had visibility on where the pressure was coming from. Yeah. If you're rolling it away and Daniel Jones has his back to the problem, that's when we've seen Daniel Jones struggle and have turnover. So it's like, it's a double-edged,
not negatively up, but whatever, that pocket awareness, right? When he doesn't see it, it's right. He doesn't have that instinct necessarily in that phase of his game.
At least if you see the pressure coming right at your face, I got to get the ball out. So like it's a double-edged sword where it's like, yeah, you want to go away from it, but if you ignore it and turn away from it, it could create bigger mistakes. So I don't really have problems with Mike Kafka's play calling. I think obviously he was trying to get Saquon Barkley involved. Saquon Barkley
just one of those games.
Tremendous. Yeah, like when we could talk about Saquon a little bit, the run game was good. We talked about it in yesterday's show. The team that runs the ball more effectively will win the game. The Cowboys ended up out-rushing the Giants, not by much, but the way the Giants were able to stay in the game was on the legs of Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones.
Yeah, 81 rushing yards on 14 carries for Saquon Barkley. You mentioned the 36-yard touchdown run in there. Nice burst, good explosiveness. I'll make this little footnote. I don't want to have to make a bigger deal about it than anything, that he was reaching for his leg and flexing something on the sidelines at the back end of this game, following, I think, a tackle near the sideline. Looks like it's no big deal, whatever, but we didn't get a chance to see him back out there. So just something to keep in the back of our minds. And then to your point, just about in the running game specifically, Daniel Jones obviously contributed 9 for 79. Best game that by far, as he's looked running the ball, looked confident, looked fluid, looked like it was a product of design. Brian Daboll said after the game, did some good things, faced a lot of pressure. Again, let's stay inside here of this offensive room and talk about the wide receiver group, because when we get to talking about Daniel Jones, one thing that we won't be able to look past is, for the second week in a row, and they made up for this, so I'm not going to over belabor it, another bad offensive pass interference call. This one was on Sterling Shepard. He's trying to jump out of the way effectively, and they throw the penalty. Now, they immediately give it back in the third quarter to the Giants, where they call a defensive holding penalty. I don't know if it's against Sills maybe or against Richie James, but effectively they're running up the field. The defender literally puts his hands up, and they're like, that's going to be a penalty for you, 15 yards. So the referees knew they made a mistake there. Nevertheless, on that play, that was a big pass completion to Kenny Golladay that got brought back in the first half on the penalty. And then in the second half and in the fourth quarter, in key situations, Sterling Shepard drops a pass, Kenny Golladay drops a pass. And so when you think about this group, you really do start to look at it and say, not only do we know we're down some weapons, but I mean, let's talk about Kenny Golladay. Doesn't get a lot of snaps, doesn't get a lot of opportunities. And then it's unfortunate that the penalty comes on a catch that he does make, because now the taste in your mouth is only about dropping a key pass in a key situation that really could have shifted the tides here. Wide receiver room combined with David Sills just didn't have it. Like they did not have it last night. It seems like in a game when you need, in general, in a season when you need all phases to be clicking, 9 out of 10 groupings, 9 out of 10 subcategories missed the mark last night.
If the offensive line was, suspect number one for the Giants, inefficiencies yesterday, number 2 or 1A had to be the terrible play by the wide receiver room. Like, let's just be honest with what it was, because listen, no Kadarius Toney, no Wan'Dale Robinson. So immediately our first round pick from a year ago, and our second round pick not available for Daniel Jones. You look at what Kenny Golladay was doing. His drop was terrible. Early in the game, Saquon Barkley had a little dump play right in his hands. He missed that one. That would have picked up an early first down to get momentum. Sterling Shepard, usually sure-handed. He's dropping passes. David Sills, when they're trying to mount a comeback, 1-possession game, 2-minute drill, first play, David Sills slips and falls, and it's an interception. The wide receiver room did not play well, and they were a problem. They were not getting as much separation. We're going to get to Jones in a minute, but it felt like the one throw to Richie James. We talked about him in the pre-show yesterday.
Oh, you got the over.
He did get the over. He got the over again. He got to 36 yards. That one throw on the sideline that he had, dropped it in a bucket over 3 defenders. Richie James made a wonderful catch on it. Yeah. Richie James was probably the only guy that played relatively decent. And that's saying a lot, considering we had wide receivers all over the place. Kenny Golladay, I don't know what the solution is, Adam, because it's a very, very big problem. But he had 3 targets. He dropped what could have been a big first down play with no one touching him. He literally had the ball in his hands, and it just like lack of focus, lack of concentration. I just don't know how much more disappointed I could be in the wide receiver group than I am today, because they did nothing to help out the offensive line or Daniel Jones or Saquon Barkley to try to win
or
this
the defense, right? Like, you didn't help the team be a chance to. Yeah, I know what you mean. 100%.
As a collection, man. It just feels so disappointing, doesn't it?
And 100%. And it's funny too, because this isn't to knock Richie James, but it's like Richie James has been having consistent games because Richie James is always going to get the better matchups, right? Like, even in a weakened wide receiver room, it's always going to be, well, we'll look at Sterling Shepard first. And then even if Kenny Golladay is struggling, when he comes on the field, you're going to take note of it, right? He's a big-bodied receiver. But you start to get down to this hierarchy of it. So he has some opportunities. He makes some catches. The one thing that, and I'll point to this too, I'm not knocking Wink Martindale. It just didn't work out. Offensively, I don't know how many times you can go to the well before the defense is going to make the adjustment. But when you look inside that wide receiver room, remember, best game, even though he had the touchdown, obviously, already this season, Daniel Bellinger, 4 catches, 40 yards. I thought there was an opportunity for some consistency there. But in some ways, when you look across this, so drops aside, 5 for 49 for Shepard, Barkley, 4 for 45, 4 for 40 for Bellinger, 4 for 36 for James, right? Sills, 2 for 20. When you look at the averages of those, they're all right around 10-ish yards or so. The ball has been dispersed very evenly across the group, and yet none of those big plays, through drops or otherwise, were able to be capitalized on. So back to basics in a lot of ways. And I think it feels like what will happen if you don't take those, and those weren't even deep shots. We're talking about 15, 20 yards down the field. If you don't take some of those looks and you try to rein it back in, then I think you see defenses be able to start to get down in the box a little bit more, start to pressure more, let the defensive front do the work. So it's a really dangerous game that they're trying to balance on offense, where you look at some of those favorable numbers. Hey, be consistent, take the chunk plays. Yeah, but those chunk plays exist far more easily in the first half, the first couple of quarters, and then in the second half when things get tight and you need the dynamic plays, nobody's in that rhythm and ready to go for those opportunities.
It is extremely disappointing. The one thing I'll say before we move over to Daniel Jones is when you think about Kenny Galladay, Kadarius Toney, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Darius Slayton, four guys that we've expected to contribute, didn't have a single catch, whether it's because they were injured, not playing, not running the right routes, dropping passes. That's extremely disappointing to me, Adam, when our $17 million man, our first-round draft pick, our second-round draft pick, and a guy that's had almost 1,000 yards receiving are nowhere to be found on the field.
I would anticipate, and we'll talk about it during the week, we'll look at snap counts coming up as well as the week moves on. I anticipate Darius Slayton is going to get an opportunity to maybe be a part of what this offense is doing, because now you have another injury anyway with Sterling Shepard as it is. We've heard that they've gone out there, and I'll be very interested to see, is there a wide receiver coming in from the outside, or is a Khalil Pimpleton going to get an opportunity up from the practice squad just because he represents the model of player that this offense seems to be predicated on? We'll get to all that as the week moves along. We waited for this intentionally because we know that Daniel Jones is the topic of conversation for everyone all the time, every second of the day. You can, every single week, every single game the Giants play, someone, last night it was Troy Aikman, will make the statement, well, obviously it feels like the Giants have made their decision as they didn't pick up the fifth-year option for Daniel Jones, so he'll be a free agent, and the Giants will have to make the choice about franchise tagging him or not. Beautiful work, guys. It's like we didn't have that information for the past 6 months. However, in this game, I want to try to do this. I want to do this the right way. Daniel Jones, in the first 3 games, has shown little areas of growth each week that you can be excited about. The running, to me, using his legs, was a really big step for him in this third game. It was out of necessity. The pressure was coming. But I thought that he was decisive in that area of his game, just first and foremost, because it was the biggest area of success for him. I thought he did a really good job when the play was not going to be there, when the pressure was coming fast and furious. He made the choice, made the commitment, and went and got positive yards with consistency. And I know this is such a silly footnote, even looked good at the end of the runs, not being clunky, right? Getting himself down, protecting himself. Just that first phase, I want to go with the positive, the growth aspect. He looked effective with the ball in his hands, trying to get yards with his feet.
I agree with you in that sense. It felt like he had a little bit more I just want to use the word awareness, where it's like, oh, I have to get down now, so I don't need to reach for these extra 3 yards and potentially fumble the ball.
Yes,
I don't need. I know I need to get out of the pocket. Or being
preemptive the way he's looked the first 2 weeks, right? Like, I have 4 more yards I can gain, but I'm going to give it up here because I'm a little bit concerned about what could happen.
Right. And then in the pocket, it was like, I know I should hold the ball to try to get the wide receivers down the field further, but I could feel the pressure. I need to just either get out of the pocket or throw the ball away. It felt like he was at least understanding that. It feels like the awareness for Daniel Jones has grown, and it's eliminating some of those like debilitating fumble turnovers, like trying to extend the play or get an extra couple of yards.
Yeah, and that is one of the positives, and there's more here. Again, when you look inside of his stat lines, you cannot look at it without saying, let's understand here, we're talking about a guy in Daniel Jones who went 20 of 37 for $196, and it doesn't matter because penalties happen. So as we always say, you can't take away the big plays, nor can you account for plays that didn't actually happen. So you have a couple of drops. You have a penalty in the first half that takes away a big chunk play. Could have been a 240, 250, yard performance through the air for Daniel Jones. Certainly. We're not concerned about the interception because it comes at the end of the game. It comes on a slip from David Sills. Can't put that, you're not going to put that on the quarterback. It still goes on the ledger. Here's where it gets interesting for me, though. So you mentioned about, I thought that with his legs, the awareness and the timing and the sense of the pocket was very good. I don't know if I'm seeing, because I said coming in, give me 3 games to put out this evaluation on Daniel Jones. By and large, my evaluation is mostly where it was when the season started. And I probably say, give me another 3 weeks. That's not solely because of Daniel Jones. It's because of everything going on with this roster. I don't know if his awareness as a passer looks significantly improved relative to where he was over the first 3 seasons of his career. there's still some instances where he's staring down some receivers or he's not getting through his progressions. In the same bag of guys dropped balls, he also had early in this game 3 or 4 passes that Diggs was ready to pounce on, right? There was a couple of ones that narrowly escaped damage, and that all falls into the mix. There's good passes, you know what I mean? This isn't me beating on him. What were the things that you liked about what he did before we talk about, because I want to close out on what feels like some level of evaluation that I mentioned wanting to do with him. And I have specific next gen stats when it comes to QBR and relative things to other quarterbacks in the league that I do think properly frame where Daniel Jones is, regardless of talent and the growth of this team overall.
So here's what I want to touch on. We talked about how bad the offensive line was. We talked about how they took accountability. Feliciano, Evan Neal, even Galinsky. Like, we understand that there were
Lewinsky is really starting to pit. I'm sorry.
I know
he's becoming the thorn in my side here, because he was supposed to be the thing you didn't have to worry about, and he's the thing that I'm constantly like looking and seeing isn't going well. I know Evan Neal's next to him, but you're supposed to be good no matter what's going on.
Yeah, I agree, and we talked about it before. He had a couple good years on an Indianapolis Colts line that has Quentin Nelson and others who are like all world talents.
Yeah.
He had flamed out originally in Seattle for not playing well. You're wondering like which is Jekyll and which is Hyde. Like, what are we going to see from Galinsky? But that's for another day. Let me wrap this up in only the way that I think about this. Daniel Jones has been pressured on 40.5% of his drop back passes this season. 40%. So out of every 10 times he drops back, 4 times there's going to be someone in his face. The only player that has had more of a higher pressure rate is Justin Fields. And we know that the Chicago Bears line is one of the worst offensive lines in the entire league. They're so bad that they've only let him throw it 15 times a game. He has 23 total completions. So the only guy behind Daniel Jones is Justin Fields, because their line is terrible. Last night, they had 24 pressures against Daniel Jones. They hit the quarterback 12 times, and they had 5 sacks. The 24 pressures was the most the Cowboys have had since 2017. It was far and away the most that any quarterback has been pressured so far this season, and it's the second most if you combine this year and last season. So he was under attack and was under duress the entire game. And it's one of those things where if you look at the box score, and I know you're going to go into QBR and you're going to talk about what that's indicative of, but his QBR dropped 15 or 18 points on the interception right at the end of the game, which, well, I mean, how do we put that on Daniel Jones? Overall, I think if you watch that game objectively, you would say that the offensive line and the wide receivers let Daniel Jones down. Daniel Jones was a force positive for this team. I would say if you were grading him on a scale of 1 to 10, he was a 7.5 or 8, and the rest of the team let him down because out of every time he dropped back, it was almost a 50% chance that someone was going to be in his face. And Adam, before you get into the stat, I had a philosophical question for you, because I know you look at Daniel Jones with a little bit more of a critical eye than I do. But I was just thinking, if you were to put, how many other quarterbacks could you have put in that situation last night outside of Daniel Jones, just dropped him into the Giants and said, go win this football game, and the result would have been different? That, like, philosophically, is it 2? Is it 10? Is it 20? Like, what's the number in your mind that you think like could overcome 24 QB pressures, 12 hits, and 5 sacks?
Top of my head here, because I have the list up when we're talking about getting into some of the stats. There's probably at least 10 or 11 guys that you can drop in there and you win that game. Like, I think there's an easy group, and this isn't even a knock on Daniel Jones, but if I'm just doing the quick math on it right now with the way this season has gone, right? So Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, I'm going to at least put guys like Jalen Hurts and Tua into the group of could succeed there. Not saying they're automatically going to. Obviously, you'd feel good about a Justin Herbert, about a Matthew Stafford, about a Kyler Murray potentially, and Aaron Rodgers. Tom Brady, for his age and where he's at in his career, probably not going to go so well. So, I'm not just going by reputation on a lot of these guys, but I think you get to around 10. And by the way, that still makes it a very valid point that you're making, right? I'm listing either guys that are elite talents already established in the league or guys that are having electric starts to their season. So we're talking about players that are considered to be in and around the top 10 to 12 quarterbacks in the league, which means unless you are one of those relatively transcendent quarterbacks, you're going to struggle. I'm not necessarily interesting questions would be like, does Kirk Cousins survive a game like that? Does it look any different? And I think this is where, and it's a good question, Andy. This is where it's like, okay, Kirk Cousins, who's a middle of the road kind of quarterback. We all know what his reputation is. Okay, he's going to struggle in some of the same areas with the pressure in his face. Is he going to make any more of the bigger play opportunities? Is he going to maybe throw some more interceptions? And that just comes down to where are we in the scripting and the offensive game plan of this? How much is being held back because of Daniel Jones? How much is being held back because of the offensive line play, because of the lack of the wide receiver room right now, right? So there's all these factors that go into it, which is why when we talk about evaluating Daniel Jones, it's like, I can go around the league and do this. Like, we can do this for a lot of quarterbacks, top to bottom, and say, like, what do they have right now? What don't they have? The Buccaneers are missing so much of their offensive line, and that's reflected in Tom Brady's QBR. But you find ways to have success and make some of those key plays in critical moments. They lose an embarrassing game against the Green Bay Packers, and a lot of it's because of what they don't have. So just to round this out, and we can have this conversation as we work our way through the week. But I went over and I looked at QBR, and thankfully it got updated last night that included this game as well. And you're right about the fact that QBR takes into account those critical moments, but do they take into account that the wide receiver slips on what ends up going down as a late fourth quarter interception for Daniel Jones? But here's the big one for me, because there's a couple of ways that they evaluate the QBR factor. So when you go overall, Daniel Jones right now is sitting there 27th with a 34 QBR after last night's game. He's just ahead of Joe Flacco, Jimmy Garoppolo, David Sills, Justin Fields, and Baker Mayfield. He's just behind Jameis Winston, Mac Jones, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan, Mitchell Trubisky. That feels like relatively the area that Daniel Jones should be in overall in terms of what he is as a quarterback. He's better than some of the lower end guys, but he's probably in this mix of dudes that have had some success. The big stat here, and I won't go fully into the bag on this because we'll have time for it. There's a stat that accounts for the number of points that should happen, that should be accounted for relative to the pressure that's coming in, and the estimated points that a quarterback should be against neutral. So what that means is, effectively, inside of a bad QBR, Daniel Jones represents a net negative of minus 6.5 points per game. That's what he brings as a quarterback to the New York Football Giants when he steps onto the field. He costs the team almost a touchdown based on his performances. Guys early in this season like Aaron Rodgers are costing his team 2 points in their performances. Some of the better ones in the league, even right now, like Geno Smith, like Cooper Rush, he represents almost 6+ positive points as a quarterback when he steps onto the field. Now, the interesting one for me, and I know this is getting in the weeds a little bit, but when we talk about it, I want to make sure that I read this right. So I'm going to lean awkwardly close to the camera here. Total expected points added with a low leverage play. And low leverage play means taking away this idea of what the neutral plays, where a quarterback can elevate and be good for his team. That is the factor that takes away all the negatives that we talk about with the New York Football Giants. Even in those circumstances right now, Daniel Jones in neutral opportunities should be representing almost +7 for this team. This is where I think the rubber meets the road a little bit here. Right now, he's net negative because of all the factors that are being put in here. But in the opportunities that he has to really impact the game positively, he's not getting there. What those two numbers tell you is his overall should be about 0. He should be basically a neutral quarterback. And instead, we're seeing that overall, he's negatively impacting the team on a game-to-game basis. And I understand the factors that are involved there, but that is just a part of the reality. And the last stat that I'll give you, I know it's long-winded. I get it. And I'm not even trying to beat up Daniel Jones. I'm trying to do both things. Look at the eye test and say, God, the offensive line sucked. And then isolated, what is Daniel Jones accomplishing? The raw QBR for Daniel Jones, which means regardless of adjusting it for what the defense is doing, is a 33.9. The effective against the defense is being accounted is 34. So Take away what the defenses are. His neutral QBR is exactly the same as it is when it comes to evaluating the defense that's being put against him. These are some of the things that are factoring into the way that I look at Daniel Jones right now. Do I wish that the team overall was better around him so we could have a clean conversation? Of course I do. But in this moment, my evaluation remains nothing's really changed from last year to this year. It's a new offense. There's a lot of issues, but I hate to punt on it, but my evaluation has to go, well, give me 3 more weeks where you're going to see a tough Chicago Bears defense and a tough Green Bay Packers defense that will continue to tell a lot about what Jones is. So sorry to be incredibly long-winded. It's not my goal here.
I do find it interesting, some of the stats you are bringing up about how he should be a force multiplier when it comes to certain situational things. And I do agree. That is the problem that Daniel Jones has had, is that we understand that he is under duress. We understand he's getting hit. But like there was against the Tennessee Titans and against the Carolina Panthers, there were opportunities for him to score and make big plays, and he missed them, right? Yep. So, like, I am fully appreciative.
That's the hard part. That's the hard part.
Like, I think the negatives, I don't necessarily put as much at the foot of Daniel Jones as I do some of the other circumstances, but he has to go out when he has the open opportunities or time to throw and make the big throws so that we can say, see, if you give him more time or you give him XYZ, he has the ability to succeed. We haven't seen that as much as we would like to. The one thing I will say is, you look at guys like Dan Duggan, who follows the Giants very closely. You look at guys like Art Stapleton, just beat writers that have been around the team for a while. Dan Duggan came out and said, what's happening around Daniel Jones on the offensive line is insurmountable. Like, no quarterback could overcome this, is what Dan Duggan said. Art Stapleton came out and said, the entire offensive unit let Daniel Jones down today. End of story, period. It's guys that follow the team, that watch everything day in, day out, that are looking at it and saying, yes, I understand he has a bad QBR. Yes, I understand that he only threw for 190 yards, but context and the eye test matters.
Of course.
He was doing everything he could to keep the Giants afloat. If you watched last night's game and you thought that he was a net negative of the totality of what was going on the offensive side of the ball, then I feel like people are reading too far into stats, because him and Saquon Barkley were the only 2 bright spots on offense at all.
And this would be a thing where it's your point. If you're going to sit here and say it's everyone else and not Daniel Jones at all, regardless of just this one game, then your head is in the sand. And if you're going to sit here and say Daniel Jones is a disaster and the team can't win with him, point blank, end of discussion, then your head is in the sand on the wrong side of it, right? You got to come back to neutral on this. And to that point, just before we get out of here, I will also reiterate a couple of these 2 other key stats here when we talk about these QBR grades. The expected points added on net neutral opportunities through the passing game for Daniel Jones. And this is something that is basically saying, when he has the clean opportunity, how much can you expect him to contribute through the air? 2.3 points per game. That is the 5th lowest opportunity. So that means regardless of who you are, opportunity, 5th worst in the league, ahead of only David Sills, Jimmy Garoppolo, Baker Mayfield, and Justin Fields. Offense not giving good opportunities for Daniel Jones to be successful at the highest level. An area that Daniel Jones has played well with his legs. Now, expected points through those neutral opportunities, he sits at 4.3. That's 5th highest behind Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, and then Daniel Jones. So the thing that he does well, he is succeeding on. But now the conversion is convert those opportunities with your legs into real points. So the Giants offensively need to find a way in the red zone to utilize Daniel Jones' best asset right now, his legs, and find ways to continue to be effective. Because out of the 2, those are offering the biggest return for this team. So there's areas to grow from here. We just need to see it come together. And it's, we're evaluating Daniel Jones and every wide receiver and Mike Kafka and Brian Dable. I know what we're going to get to here is, at the end of the day, the New York Football Giants are still a 2-1 football team. And we're going to talk, I don't think we were negative overly on this one. The result was the result. The Giants are still 2-1. They have the Chicago Bears coming up. They have a chance to be 3-1 before having to go to London. This is exactly, I think, Andy, what we expected from this season. Takeaway wins and losses. The games are, you want to battle. You want to see opportunities to win and be competitive. You want to see development. This was one of those lumps that you hope the team can grow from. The big question is, are there changes or adjustments coming that can help bring stability in all 3 phases, where the Giants had a blocked field goal, mind you, early in this game that turned out to maybe not be the biggest factor in the world, but there are issues. This team is growing.
at the end of the day, Adam, the Giants are still 2-1. If you looked at the schedule before the start of the season and said, through the first 3 games, what are you hoping the Giants would be? If the Giants are 2-1, you would sign up for that immediately. The Giants are a missed field goal away from being 1-2, right? Like the way that the Giants are going to win games, it's going to be a very, very, very thin margin for error. Yeah, it's going to be a thin margin for error, and these games are going to come down to one big play here or there that's going to dictate what's going to happen. That's the game plan the Giants are adhering to because of a lot of things. Daniel Jones' ability to see the field, the wide receiver play, the offensive line, et cetera, et cetera. So the good news is, Giant fans, we're 2-1. We're in second place in the division. We have a winnable game coming up at home against the Chicago Bears, where the Giants would have the ability to go 3-1. They're already favored in this game. It would be a really big bounce back and show some really big character. It'd be a testament to the Giants if they could come out and beat a team like the Bears that they should be beating at home.
Yeah, and listen, let's not bottom line. You lost the game at home to a Dallas team with a backup quarterback under center. It's a disappointing loss. There's no two ways about it, right? But you got to turn the page. You got to try to get yourself back on track. We'll come back in. We're going to talk about that wide receiver room. What happens next year? There's another hole to fill with Sterling Shepard going down. Is it going to be Darius Slayton? Is it going to be someone from the practice squad? Is it going to be someone from outside the building? And then across the offensive line, I think real questions here because Evan Neal isn't going anywhere, but can you do something different on the interior with Glowinski, with Feliciano? Let's go ahead and tap into whether or not Nicholas Gates actually has an opportunity to get back onto the field here, maybe for Big Blue, and impact the way things look across that front. We're going to break it all down, man. Shout out to the entire YouTube live stream conversation, man. The comments were coming fast and furious. It looks like a separate conversation was happening in the comments relative to the podcast, which is a great thing. Continue to engage it. We really appreciate it. Subscribe, follow, get the podcast feed wherever you get those needs fulfilled. We'll be back in all week, man. There is so much still to dissect from this game and looking forward. But until next time, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.